was scrolling through Craigslist looking for a roommate. That's when I saw an ad that seemed perfect. It read, "Roommate wanted, large room, great location, affordable rent." I contacted the poster, a guy named Alex, who invited me over to see the place. The house was in a decent part of town, but it looked old and a bit run down. Alex greeted me at the door. He was a bit friendly, but had a sort of intense look in his eyes. He showed me around, and the room was great, spacious and furnished. I decided to take it. Things started getting weird right away. Alex had these strict house rules, like no noise after 9 p.m., never going into his study. I agreed, thinking I could handle it, but then I started hearing strange noises at night, like thumps and scratches coming from Alex's study. When I asked about it, he shrugged it off, saying it was just a house settling. One night the noise got so loud I couldn't sleep. I decided to break the rule and peek into Alex's study. What I saw chilled me to the bone. The room was filled with photos of people, the faces crossed out in red, and newspaper clippings about missing persons. Horrified, I confronted Alex. He became unhinged, ranting about how his previous roommates had betrayed him and how he had to deal with them. I realized those people in the photos were his past roommates, and now I was one of them. In a panic, I locked myself in my room and called the police. They arrived quickly and arrested Alex. It turned out he was wanted for several disappearances. The police told me I was lucky to get out when I did. I moved out immediately and never looked back. The thought of what could have happened if I hadn't checked his study still haunts me. The Craigslist ad, which seems like a lucky break, almost became my worst nightmare. I needed a temporary place to stay, so I turned to Craigslist and found a listing for a cheap room in a shared house. The landlord, Mr. Jenkins, was a middle-aged man who lived in the house as well. He seemed friendly enough when I met him, so I moved in the following week. The house was old and creaky, but my room was comfortable. However, things started to feel off soon after I moved in. I'd find my things slightly moved or hear faint whispers at night. I chalked it up to it being a new place and tried to ignore it. One night while I was trying to sleep, I heard a faint clicking sound coming from my room. It was repetitive and seemed to be coming from the wall. Curious and a bit unnerved, I searched for sources and discovered a small hidden camera tucked behind a bookshelf pointed directly at my bed. Panic set in. I confronted Mr. Jenkins, who at first denied everything. But as I pressed him, he broke down and admitted he had cameras in all of the rooms. He said he'd like to watch over his tenants for their safety. It was a sickening confession. I called the police and they discovered Mr. Jenkins had a whole network of cameras throughout the house, feeding live footage to his computer. He was arrested and it was later revealed he had been doing this for years, watching his tenants without their knowledge. The thought that my privacy had been so grossly violated made my skin crawl. I left the house immediately and never returned. The experience left me deeply shaken. The idea of someone watching me invading my most private moments was a level of horror I thought I'd never experience. It was a stark reminder that sometimes the most ordinary places can hide the most disturbing secrets. I was browsing Craigslist for a new job when I stumbled upon a listing for a personal assistant. It was a live-in position with great pay, and the employer, a reclusive author named Mr. Blackwood, promised a generous bonus after a year. Desperate for a fresh start, I applied and was invited for an interview at his remote mansion. The mansion was located at the end of a long, winding road, shrouded in dense fog. Mr. Blackwood was a stern, imposing man with a piercing gaze. He explained that the job required strict confidentiality and odd hours fitting for his nocturnal writing sessions. I accepted the job, driven more by curiosity about the mysterious author than the generous offer. The first few weeks were uneventful, but then things took a dark turn. I started receiving cryptic messages on my phone, always at midnight. They were from Mr. Blackwood, instructing me to perform bizarre tasks like rearranging bookshelves or setting the table for unseen guests. If I ever questioned the task, he would become irate, accusing me of insubordination. One night the message was different. It was a single chilling sentence: go to the cellar, unlock the door, and don't look inside. The cellar was strictly off limits, and Mr. Blackwood had forbidden me from ever going near it. My heart raced as I descended the creaky stairs, the air growing colder with each step. I found the door, an ancient heavy thing with a large padlock. As I unlocked it, I heard faint, desperate whispering coming from the other side. It was a chorus of voices, all begging for help for release. The The terror was overwhelming, but something compelled me to open the door. Inside the room is pitch black. The whispers grew louder and more frantic, then suddenly they stopped and a single cold voice spoke from the darkness. "Welcome." At that moment I realized the horrifying truth. Mr. Blackwood's stories weren't fiction. He was documenting his twisted reality and I was his latest character. I ran, fleeing the mansion and the unspeakable horrors it concealed. I never looked back and I never stopped running. The messages stopped, but the memory of that night, the voices in the cellar, and the cold welcome that awaited me in the darkness will haunt me forever. I was browsing Craigslist for vintage camera gear when I stumbled upon an ad for a rare 1950s camera in pristine condition. The price was surprisingly low, and the seller, a man named Richard, claimed to be a collector downsizing his collection. Intrigued, I arranged to meet him at his home. Richard's house was in a secluded neighborhood, his property surrounded by high fences. Inside the house was like a museum, filled with antique cameras and photographs. Richard was polite, but had an intense, unsettling aura. He seemed more interested in talking about his collection than finalizing the sale. As we discussed the camera, I noticed a series of striking portraits on the wall. Richard proudly explained he had taken them all, each subject someone who had come by to buy from his collection. The photos were beautiful, but unnervingly intimate, capturing moments of apparent fear and surprise. Sensing my unease, Richard insisted on showing me his studio where he took the portraits. Reluctantly, I followed him to a small windowless room filled with camera equipment and bright lights. That's when I saw it. A chair in the center of the room surrounded by restraints. My heart raced as Richard's demeanor shifted. He spoke of his art, how each buyer became part of his collection, not just through transaction but as a permanent fixture in his twisted gallery. I realized then that the fear captured in those portraits was real. Thinking quickly, I complimented the camera on a nearby shelf, distracting Richard. As he turned to look at it, I made a run for the door, sprinting out of the house and into the street where I didn't stop until I reached a crowded area. I reported Richard to the police, but when they arrived at his house, he was gone, and so was his collection. The portraits, the camera, and even the furniture, everything had vanished. I was lucky to escape, but the experience left me deeply shaken. The realization that my interest in a simple camera could have led me to become a permanent part of a madman's collection was a chilling reminder of the darkness that can lurk behind even the most innocuous interactions. I was searching for affordable housing on Craigslist when I found a listing for a basement apartment that seemed too good to be true. The rent was incredibly low, and it was fully furnished. The landlord, Mr. Donovan, was an elderly man who lived alone in the main house above. He seemed kind but overly eager to rent out the space. The apartment was small but cozy. However, I soon noticed something odd. One of the walls had a deep rhythmic thumping sound at night. It was subtle, but once I noticed it, I couldn't ignore it. Curious and a bit unnerved, I asked Mr. Donovan about the noise. He brushed it off, saying it was probably just the house settling. But his hurried demeanor and quick change of subject raised my suspicions. One night, the thumping grew louder, more insistent. I couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Driven by a mix of fear and curiosity, I pressed against the wall, and to my shock, it swung open, revealing a hidden room. The sight that met my eyes was horrifying. The room was a makeshift cell with chains on the walls and a small cot in the corner. It was clear someone had been kept there against their will. In the dim light, I saw scratches on the walls, desperate tallies marking days or weeks. Before I could process the scene fully, I heard footsteps. Mr. Donovan was coming down the stairs, his kindly facade gone, replaced by a chilling expression of fury and madness. He had meant for the basement to be my tomb, another secret in his hidden chamber of horrors. Adrenaline surged through me and I acted without thinking. I pushed past him, racing up the stairs and out the house, screaming for help. Neighbors came to my aid and the police were called. The investigation revealed the dark truth. Mr. Donovan had been abducting people for years, his basement and hidden chambers for unspeakable horrors. I had narrowly escaped a fate too dreadful to imagine. The memory of that night, the hidden room, and the real-life monster who had masqueraded as a harmless old man haunts me to this day. It was a grim reminder that sometimes the most ordinary facades hide the darkest secrets.